Good morning and welcome to the program. Our top story this morning, senior Abbott government ministers telling Sky News they've been surprised at the lack of resources Labor is throwing at trying to win the upcoming Canning by-election. My understanding is that the Foreign Minister yesterday briefed Cabinet on the campaign, telling her colleagues Labor is not pouring the resources the Liberals had expected in the ALP trying to win the seat. Another minister said Labor was, quote, nowhere to be seen on the ground in terms of advertising and other campaign material in Canning. It's understood Julie Bishop told Cabinet Labor appears to be holding fire and strategically targeting a new WA seat that will come into effect at the next general election. That's when a redistribution will see the seat of Canning split and a new electorate called Burt created, whose demographics should favour the ALP. Another Cabinet Minister told Sky News that Labor appears to be, quote, running dead in Canning because they believe a bad result for the Liberals would see the Prime Minister rolled, and Labor does not want that to happen. With me this morning to discuss this and the other stories of the day, Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer Ed Husic and Assistant Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. Gentlemen, good morning to you. Josh Frydenberg, it seems that
nice to be with you.
The effort to secure and hold on to Canning might be a bit easier than previously thought because Labor not putting as much money into it that the government had anticipated.
Absolutely not. Make no mistake, Kieran, the Labor Party wants to win this seat of Canning. They will throw everything possibly they can at this by-election, and as you know, governments tend to have significant swings against them in by-elections. We are seeing the Prime Minister today being joined by the Finance Minister to support Andrew Hastie, our fantastic candidate in Canning. We know it's going to be tough, but we know with a SAS captain as our candidate, with the great work that Don Randall, the late Don Randall, did in that seat, winning 5 elections for Canning, we can win this seat, but it's going to be tough. Okay. And make no mistake, Labor will try very hard to win it.
What do you make then of the suggestion that your senior colleague, the Foreign Minister, briefed Cabinet yesterday, which I've had confirmed to me, in saying that the Labor Party is not pouring the amount of resources that the government had expected them to in trying to win the seat?
Well, I wasn't at that discussion, so I don't know what was said, but I'm sure that the Labor Party wants to win this by-election, absolutely. And our job is to make sure that they don't, and that's why the Prime Minister is out there campaigning today with our fantastic candidate.
Ed Husic, your reaction to this story, and I guess the other element to the story that I reported this morning, that Julie Bishop mentioned that Labor strategically is looking at the longer term, or the election, the general election that is, when there's a redistribution that opens up a new seat called Burt, which includes Labor areas of the current seat of Canning.
Well, they can't even, the coalition, get their lines right. I mean, they're claiming on the one hand we're not putting resources in, and now we're hearing from Josh that we are putting resources in, and we're all expected to take serious note of noted Labor observer Julie Bishop as to what we're doing in the seat of Canning, and that is supposed to be the legitimate grounds for this story. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The best test, I'm going to give you one thing, the best test of how serious we're taking it is how many times has Bill Shorten been in Canning compared to Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott's finally turning up today. We've been out there talking about the things that are important to Canning voters, most notably the fact that in WA, when you look at the jobless rate, it's higher than the national rate. Jobless as a result of the downturn in mining, up 30,000 over the last 3 years, a really serious issue, and we've been focused on that. Tony Abbott's been in hiding, and Julie Bishop reckons she can make some sort of observations about Labor Party strategy. Give me a break.
Well, it sounds like they're a bit more confident than they otherwise would have been, that they don't believe the amount of resources are being poured into it commensurate with a party that really wants to win the seat from the government. You reject that out of hand?
Yeah, sure. Whatever Julie Bishop says about our motives or approach or being able to make an assessment, I totally believe. Like, it really is not, it doesn't stand a believable test, Kieran. So let's just look at the issues on the ground as they are, compare Bill Shorten's commitment, the way that we've been involved in that campaign, the commitments that we've made in terms of local infrastructure, for example, the type of things that people want to see improvements on, building on the work that Don Randall has done in that area. You know, we are very focused on this, have been, and we're not going to get sidetracked by some sort of, you know, apparent observation by Julie Bishop.
Josh Frydenberg, your thoughts on that, your reaction?
Well, I'm not going to speculate any more on speculation. I mean, that's effectively what we're doing here, Kieran. I'd much rather want to talk about Australia's economic future, which will help the people of Canning if we sign this free trade agreement with China and we're able to get it through the parliament. Because today, the big revelation is that 2 Labor premiers in Daniel Andrews in Victoria and Jay Weatherill in South Australia and a Labor leader in New South Wales, opposition leader, have actually expressed their support for the coalition's free trade agreement with China. Now, the only Labor leader who's against this
Josh,
deal
I'll let you
is Bill
elaborate
Shorten.
on that, but I do want to say to you that on this issue, this is something else I've picked up from the government, that at the senior ranks, this is something that is resonating in Canning. There are 10,000 fly-in, fly-out workers in Canning, a seat of just over 100,000. 10,000, I'm told, by senior members of the government, of fly-in, fly-out workers in that seat. So obviously the China FTA, a big issue there heading into this by-election. And as you rightly point out, Josh Frydenberg, Daniel Andrews now very much in support of it.
Yeah, but what also affects the people in Canning is the resources sector. That's why you've got fly-in, fly-out workers. And what is going to happen with this free trade agreement is that the tariffs on Australian resource exports to China will fall. So this will actually create tens of thousands of new jobs, including in the agriculture sector, including in the services sector, which, you know, is all relevant to Canning. So if you want to actually talk about, you know, what Bill Shorten should be focusing on, it's getting behind an agreement that's in Australia's long-term interest and not just running the union's scare campaign.
Ed Husick, I'll read to you what Daniel Andrews said yesterday. He says that his government supports the free trade agreement. He says the China FTA is good news for Victorian jobs. He was unequivocal yesterday in the Parliament, the Victorian Premier, Jay Weatherill, also supporting the China FTA. Labor cannot credibly oppose this, can it?
We're in favour of good trade agreements. We've got a track record ourselves of supporting them, and we believe that freeing up trade is a good thing for economies, for growth, for jobs. But you cannot dispute, and anyone who's spent time in their communities, and as I have in mine, having done a number of mobile offices across my area recently, and I've had people come up to me worried about jobs and worried about losing jobs and having them replaced by overseas labour. I've had that expressed to me by people in my area, and those concerns you've picked up in terms of Canning. The labour market testing provisions that are clearly absent, there is no firm protection there. This is reliant on policy within the FTA. You know, this needs to be addressed, and we think that it can be addressed and it should be addressed, and people who are concerned about their jobs want it to be addressed. They want to be certain that their jobs will not be forsaken as a result of a trade deal that has been sought to be, you know, ratified by an Abbott government that's got more of a mind to a headline than to the job waiting line.
Josh Frydenberg, I want to put to you an argument that's been made by the former Trade Minister Craig Emerson, get your reaction to it. He says this morning that labour market testing is not required under the FTA, that it's basically left to the Australian government of the day, their discretion. He says the solution to this is a general piece of legislation making it mandatory. It doesn't require a renegotiation of the deal. So why not just introduce that, have some certainty here and some guarantee that labour market testing is mandatory under the FTA?
Well, we're very satisfied about these labour market testing provisions, which are in the FTA, with the power of the Immigration Department to give the green or the red light to particular workers who come to work on particular projects. And it has to be pointed out that the number of people who came into Australia on 457s was higher under the Labor Party than it is under the Coalition. That's a key fact. Now, the only Labor leader who's against this free trade agreement is Bill Shorten. All his state colleagues and former Prime Minister, so-called mentor to Bill Shorten, Bob Hawke, has come out strongly in favour of it. And because they understand, as an economy of 23 million people, we need to link ourselves into a much bigger economy, a dynamic economy of 1.2 billion
why not
people.
provide the added certainty? Well, specifically on that issue, a blanket bit of legislation, provide the certainty, move on.
Because
in terms
this
of the market
deal is
testing
done.
for workers.
This, you know, Craig Emerson and Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd tried for years to get a deal with China, but they couldn't clinch it, nor with Korea, dare I say it, nor with Japan. We've done all three. Now, this deal is done, and we've heard in recent days that China will walk away from this agreement if we seek to try to renegotiate it. Now, we don't believe we need to renegotiate it. We believe there's going to be tens of thousands of new jobs that will flow, and it's just common sense, Kieran, that your children and your grandchildren want to have the job opportunities that will flow from an economy of 1.2 billion people. It's just common sense.
Yeah, okay,
so
well,
let's just get on with it.
And Ed Husic, I guess it's common sense as well to, suggest that a government of the day is hardly not going to require labour market testing before allowing foreign workers in. I mean, what government in its right mind would allow that to happen? So isn't the government's position defensible here, and that the deal is done, so get on with it?
The Abbott government is more interested in a headline about a trade agreement than protecting Australian jobs. Bottom line, the way that it stands at the moment is that labour market testing will be at the whim of policy, which could be changed at a moment's notice. They are not interested in providing the legislation and the assurance to the Australian public and to people that are concerned about their jobs, that their jobs will be protected and that they will not be used at a moment's notice, that they will not be made redundant for the sake of a major project in the way in which this trade agreement allows for jobs to occur.
But there's no way you're going to block it.
And
surely.
so,
There's no way
we're saying
Labor
to
will block the
we're saying
FTA
to
or
the
try to
Abbott,
repeal it.
we're saying to the Abbott government, provide the assurance at a time where jobless numbers are higher now than they have been in 20 years, higher now than what it was under the GFC because of what the Abbott government's doing. It should be working harder to protect jobs, not seeing them off for the sake of a headline.
A quick break, back in just a moment with Ed Husic and Josh Frydenberg. Josh, you can continue after the break. Quick break, back in just a moment.
Thanks, yeah.
This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, Ed Husic and Josh Frydenberg. Josh Frydenberg, apologies, I interrupted you to go to the break. Your thoughts?
Look, I was just going to say, we're seeing a theme running through Bill Shorten's conduct here, most recently in relation to this China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, where he's not acting in the interests of all Australians, he's acting in the interests of the union movement, because just last week we saw in the Parliament the Labor Party block the reinstatement of the Australian Building and Construction Commission, which was a cop on the beat on our building sites, producing a $6 billion a year productivity dividend. And we've also seen Bill Shorten try to shield the unions from proper scrutiny at the Royal Commission with their partisan attacks on Dyson Heydon. So there's actually a theme, whether it's the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, whether it's the ABCC, whether it's the Royal Commission, where the Labor Party is actually doing the bidding of the unions, who only represent 13% of the Australian private sector workforce.
There's a risk here, isn't there, Ed Husic, if Labor goes too far
through the break for. But come on.
Well, no, but there's a serious point here in terms of the Royal Commission, that you've made your point about Dyson Heydon. The guy is a long-serving High Court judge. People can make up their judgments, but judgments as to the claims of apprehended bias themselves. But in terms of some of the serious outcomes here, Labor's really got to be credible about the outcomes, surely. Otherwise, you'll be seen to be simply being a human shield to the thugs and others that are accused here of wrongdoing in the Commission.
Let me just first say that what Josh was making reflections on, Josh being part of a government led by noted nation builder Tony Abbott. I mean, Tony Abbott exists as a leader of a political party, not as a leader of a nation. He will always put his party's interests first. He will not put the nation's interests first, and he will always pick a blue. That's the evidence. He will always pick a fight. And so we're seeing this on some other things we'll no doubt talk about this morning. I'm not having Josh say that having him as a minister of the Abbott government tell us about political fights, political blues, when you see what Tony Abbott does. In terms of your point, Kieran, in relation to the Royal Commission, we've said zero tolerance. If there is bad behaviour by employers or unions, deal with it. Give the resources to the police, give the resources to the proper regulators, handle it that way instead of setting up an expensive political exercise in a Royal Commission. Another example of a political fight that Tony Abbott has wanted to start.
Let's look at the lack of consistency in the government narrative and message as well, particularly on the economic front. Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, just a few weeks ago, according to Phil Curry's analysis today and his reporting in the Financial Review, just a few weeks ago was saying to Labor, OK, can we get your bipartisan support for a restricted bank deposit tax that just hits the big four banks, won't hit the minor players. So just a few weeks ago he was looking at coming up with a deal. Now he's saying Labor's got to come out and oppose this tax on deposits. What's going on?
Okay, well, let's start here from the beginning, that in August 2013, 2 days before the election was called, Chris Bowen announced a bank deposit tax. Now, this was designed to meet the government's commitments and its obligations to guarantee deposits up to $250,000. We said at the time that we would consult widely and that we would establish a financial system inquiry led by David Murray. Joe Hockey, right through that process, said that he would consult widely before making any final decision. Now, David Murray's inquiry found that we didn't need to have this bank deposit tax because the banks have actually built up their capital reserves as a result of what the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority has been asking them to do. So why only a few weeks ago was he still pursuing it? Why only a few weeks ago was he still pursuing it now? That's the worst thing that Labor could have come up with. He was pursuing his consultations and then he made a recommendation to Cabinet that we don't proceed with it going forward. Now the question is, will the Labor Party, who came up with this bank deposits tax, which will be passed on to consumers, which the groups like the National Seniors have come out strongly against, as well as the regional banks, will the Labor Party continue to book the revenue from this bank deposits tax going into the next election? We won't. Okay. Is it really necessary, given the Murray findings that Josh Frydenberg referred to, Ed Husic? Is it now redundant, given that the outcome of that particular review?
Can I just clarify a few facts to complement the nice story that we're getting out of the coalition government on this issue? The first thing is that the Council of Financial Regulators, headed by Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens, recommended this. Joe Hockey criticised and complained about this and then took it to the election as policy. He then, as you've pointed out, and a variety of other instances, backed in this proposal and now has been rolled in his own cabinet as a result to basically turn his back on everything that he's said to this point about the need for this type of measure. And I come back to the point I said earlier, if it's a choice between policy and the nation and politics, Tony Abbott and his government will always pick politics, because now you're hearing through the coalition government today that this is being set up as yet another political fight. And we certainly will have an opportunity in a few weeks' time. I sit on the House of Reps Economics Committee, and on 18 September the RBA Governor and Chair of the Council of Financial Regulators will be appearing before us, and we're going to hear his views in relation to this decision by the government not to proceed with something that regulators believe is an important measure.
All right, Josh, your reaction to that, because obviously Ed Husic is, through that committee, very much across the view of the regulators. Your take on that? You're willing to go against their recommendations?
Well, Joe Hockey's consulted widely, and there's going to be a clear choice at the next election. You can have a bank tax under the Labor Party, or you can have no bank tax under the coalition. That's it.
There you go.
That's it. That's it. And we have not only met our commitments on the carbon tax and the mining tax, but we've also reduced small business taxes for the lowest in half a century. That's going to be our record going into the next election.
That's it, Kieran. It's all about politics. It's all about scoring the points. It's all about, dusting off the carbon tax campaign and now applying it on the bank levy. This is all it's about. It's not about policy. It's about politics.
Well, I can say to you, David Murray.
Just quickly, Josh,
David
sorry,
Murray
we're out of
is
time.
an
Just quickly,
expert.
very quickly.
David Murray,
right,
as an
Josh
expert,
Frydenberg,
has
FUZ.
made a recommendation not to go through.
Gents, thank you both. Have a good day. A quick break on AIM Agenda. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.